It's been about 30 years since the collapse of the Soviet Union and Warsaw Pact. In all of this time, there has been very little attention paid in Western media around the relics and remnants of this 70-year historical period. Sure, people will speak about figures like Miklos Nemeth, Solidarity in Poland, the Baltic Way movement, the fall of Ceausescu, but comparatively little attention is provided to the physical remains and remnants which scatter across Central Eastern Europe, reminding people in their lived experiences, their daily lives, of the history that their country once endured. I, of course, can't cover everything, but I hope to give you a decent overview so that you may do your own research and perhaps visit these relics of history for yourself someday. If you are from the region and have an example that I did not share, I encourage you to leave it down in the comments below. The first place I wish to show you is a often overlooked tourist destination southwest of Budapest. You can find it just off the M4 metro line. It is called Memento Park and features a number of statues from the old communist era. Back in the 90s, this served as a backdrop for a number of music videos, documentaries, and historical pieces on the communist era. It's where people would go to get their B-roll footage, essentially. I believe that while this park is not the most well-known and certainly could use several upgrades, including trees and shade in the summer heat, the fact that a group of Budapest residents got together to figure out how to move these statues and place them in their own area, where other countries, other cities may very well have looked at these monumental statues and thought it better to scrap them for parts to build other, newer monuments more befitting of a free, democratic country. During the time of socialist rule across Central Eastern Europe, there were a number of socialist new cities built as idealized versions of what a proper city in socialism would look like. These took the form of Dunajváros in Hungary or Nowa Huta in Poland. Today, these are largely still occupied places, oftentimes praised for their human-scale urban design. However, socialist governments did not just undertake the planning of massive cities designed for hundreds of thousands. They took a hand in building more micro-scale neighborhood developments as well. One of these developments I feel that gets overlooked and understudied because the Moscow archives won't open is the village community of Strazdmuija, northeast of Riga. This community is most notable in the historical record for being the site of a treaty that ended a war in the 17th century and a still-standing royal manor from the time of the Baltic German nobility. But today, at least for our purposes, what you must know about this community is that it was built up in the 1950s and 60s. Back in 1955, Stalin decided that Moscow should be free of so-called undesirables. He thought that the disabled were a plague on the city, and so, among other groups of disabled people, he sent all blind and visually impaired people within the city limits of Moscow, beyond the 101st kilometer, largely to Riga, where they ended up in a village known as Strazdmuija. This place was transformed from the site of an old royal manor to a place which, for its time, arguably was one of the most accessible places for a disabled person to live. Now, of course, it wasn't out of the goodness of their hearts. The Soviet government, of course, wanted these people to have jobs and provide work for the Soviet economy, and they did. Indeed, there were a number of very famous carpentry factories and light industry in the area, which throughout the 1950s, 60s, and 70s provided jobs to thousands upon thousands of people with visual impairments or blindness who came from all across the Soviet Union to this one place. They had work, they had a social life, they had a choir, they had a number of community groups, and speaking personally, the best thing you can have as a person with a disability is a social network, a community around you that supports you and that you can feel like you are a part of. Finally, I feel it's important to mention that over the last several years, there has been a concerted effort to remove from public view the old Soviet-era statues and monuments which once stood proud in our city centers and main thoroughfares. In Poland, back in 2022, 4 Red Army statues were removed in the same year that Russia decided to invade Ukraine. These statues no longer are a relic of a bygone era. They are actively being politicized, and people are taking a stance that they don't want to be a part of that Russian world. They don't want to be reminded every day of their former occupation. It has been 30 years. These statues no longer need a place of reverence in the public sphere. They should belong in museums, or as Hungary decided, in parks outside of public view where you can choose to view them. Or you can live your life in blissful ignorance that these countries were ever occupied so fervently by a colonial government under the banner of socialist brotherhood. The fact that major international publications covered the demolition in Poland says to me that perhaps the Russian government, which is often quoted as having a very stern opposition to these demolitions, it says perhaps the Russians have a different collective memory, one diametrically opposed to the reality of Red Army occupation, of what this large bust of Lenin being in the center of Riga means to the Latvians who have to walk past it every day. These countries have been under their own sovereignty for 30 years. Let them stay that way. Let these relics be relics, not constant reminders of oppression. If you enjoyed today's episode, please don't forget to subscribe and leave a comment down below. If you want to check out more of my work, I have a Substack linked in the description. My regular news broadcasts will hopefully be returning on Sundays with information about business and culture across the European Union. Thank you.